Is this where you go dying? And I hope you hear it. So, height's okay, yes. Can anybody hear me? Right, hands up for those people who have been here haven't been here are here for the first time. Okay, right. If you're not sitting on it, you will notice the MC, which is myself, is missing. Briefly, I have plenty of notes, but the most important thing, as is a tradition in the philosophy school, is to just have a few moments silence. Thank you. I think we are Corbus. The philosophy school is based in London, and the leader of the London school at the moment is Mr. Lambie. And he has given a few minutes of his time to put a recording together.
Thomlinson, the Lion of Africa. That's how I will always think of and remember him. Edward used to have a clock in his study in Johannesburg, which was unique in this sense. It went the wrong way. It didn't go clockwise, it went anti-clockwise. It's the only such timing instrument I've ever seen, and it was surprisingly distracting to be in the room and try not to look at it and try not to be somewhat irritated by it. It was a remarkable thing, but in a way it said so much about Edward. He wouldn't just take things for granted. He wouldn't just take the accepted view of things. He was a self-taught man. His library was full of books, many, and the remarkable thing is, as far as I can tell, he'd read most of them. So he was self-taught, but well-taught, and not bound by convention, and he wouldn't follow just what everyone else thought and said. As far as I'm concerned personally, he was a tremendous support, and he showed utmost loyalty. When I became an elite of the school in 1994, this is what happened, and every time we used to arrive in Africa, he would be there with Jean, and not just in Africa. He'd turn up in Australia, in England, all sorts of places. He was just always there, and always ready to help, always ready to do everything he possibly could. He was the most dynamic man I can think of. The school in Cape Town in particular, and latterly in Johannesburg, as far as I can tell, it was more than a rite of passage to do the Argus cycle race. It was a prerequisite to admission to the upper echelons of the school. Without this grueling, horrible event, there was no real prospect of advancement. It used to make me tired just to hear about how grueling the occasion was. But anyway, it was tremendous, and he was tremendous. He was a keen sailor, keen mountaineer, and at one stage he became involved in mountain rescue. And I had this vision of somebody falling on a mountain and falling into some inaccessible, dangerous place with broken limbs and not long to live. And out over the ridge would come Edward, and he'd be the man who'd put you on his back and take you home. He was that kind of man. last time he met Mr. McLaren, Mr. Leon McLaren, was in Durban, when Mr. McLaren was very ill. He was in the Enter Bailey Hospital in Durban on his deathbed, and Edward went to see him, and Mr. McLaren said to him, "Eddie, the Lord comes to the one he loves." And I like to think that's what happened. So bless you, Edward. Thank you for your good company.
I've got copious notes, but I would just like to draw your attention to a few things. Firstly, it was good to hear for the first time Mr. Lambie. This will be available online for probably the rest of, for a period. And many people who couldn't make it today, we welcome them too. It's amazing what COVID-19 did for the whole community, a global community. And things are possible, workplaces have changed. Those are my notes for later. I'd like to introduce to you the leader who took over from Mr. Thomlinson, a doctor, Dr. Kendall, whose wife is going to speak for him.
Good morning. I'd like to say something briefly before I begin reading Shannon's speech. Shannon is unable to speak clearly, so I will read it. The relationship between Edward and Shannon was a close one, and particularly since he came back to Cape Town from Johannesburg. And it has been very, very tender to watch how they've spiritually communed with each other. The one hard of hearing, the other unable to speak. So the only thing they could do was often to sit in silence, particularly at the end. So I know that the words of Shannon's speech are authentic. I know that for Shannon, Edward was a spiritual father. And as I read this speech, please understand that it comes from the heart of Shannon. It is perhaps coincidence that Edward Thomlinson's initials, T-E-T, form the French word tête, for head. Not only was he head of the school here in Cape Town, but the rational faculty was strong in him. It was perhaps the first characteristic that new acquaintances noticed. They were almost always impressed with his reasonability, impeccable logic, and clear articulation, albeit with Scottish fluency of humble origins. He read widely and used a vocabulary to rival that of most English graduates. What was less obvious was the fineness of his mind. That was the size. What was less obvious than the fineness of his mind was the size of his heart. But he certainly didn't wear his heart on his sleeve. He was a passionate man. He loved his family, the school, and his students, although they did not often see past his stern demeanor. In ordinary life, he was a highly practical man and had a certain amount of street smarts. Prior to acquiring this property, the school owned a house in Bowood Road, a few blocks away from here. Edward often used to go through the neighborhood in the early mornings. He would go past this property in Lana Road and thought to himself, and I can't do the Scottish accent, it would be nice if the school could own this house one day. Given the size of the school at the time, this was clearly just a pipe dream, an impossibility. But Edward stuck to his thoughts and his heart's desire. And lo and behold, a few short years, some luck, and lots of generosity later, this property was bought by the school. What an example of the attractive power of thought and feeling. Edward was like a spiritual father to me and changed the course of my life. I am eternally grateful to him for that. Edward and his wife Jean lived here in this house for more than a decade, watching the property and the school growing and refining to what it is today. He loved this place and its setting. Let us not imagine Edward cooped up in a grave or an urn somewhere, stuck for the rest of eternity. No, no. This is his legacy. It's all about us, now, in this place. Lacking much capacity myself for poetry, I've borrowed some lines by Mark Twain. Warm summer sun, shine kindly here. Warm summer wind, blow softly here. Green Table Mountain, cradle him gently here. Lie lightly, lie lightly. Good night, dear heart. Good night. Good night.
Edward's firstborn was Frances. Granddaughter, first granddaughter was Frances, and she has recorded something which had to be edited because it was far too long. Just one anecdote. One day, Edward woke up and nudged his partner and said, "I'm sleeping with a grandmother."
Thank you so much for joining us, and thank goodness for YouTube. and this accessibility for so many people to come together to celebrate his life. I'd like to thank those of you who reached out from all around the world to share memories and moments where he touched your life, or indeed how Mrs. Thomlinson and Grandma Jean did too. My name is Frances Preston, and I was Mr. Thomlinson's, Eddie's, granddaughter. He was my grandfather. And these are my memories. One thing we can all agree on is that he was an extraordinary man. He inspired us all in some shape or form. His life was an expression of love and challenge on every level. He loved life and took hold of it with both hands. Sport was such an integral part of his life, seeing as it gave him the opportunity to challenge all aspects of his physical, spiritual, and mental being. But none came in comparison with his love of cycling. He loved it, and indeed, if we look at his life in its totality, it was the background of his great tapestry. It gave him the sense of adventure, connection, and seeing him on the bike, you knew he was truly one. Many stories have been committed to our memories, and indeed the writings he saved. Too many to mention here. I was very lucky to have had this adventurous man as my grandfather. He was not a conventional man, choosing to leave Edinburgh and seek opportunities far afield, travelling to Cape Town by boat, then by train to Johannesburg. Unconventional indeed. And it is through Robert Frost that I find these words speak truly of his life in its entirety. The Road Not Taken, by Robert Frost. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. 2 roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less travelled by, and that has made all the difference. From the age of 5, I was exposed to his love of philosophy, challenge and inquiry, starting with the one-to-one lectures in his study at Tulana Road on the red velvet footstool. Hours of listening to him, tackling the great thinkers, historians, teachers, and any new book he had to hand. This excerpt comes to mind from His Holiness, a man to whom he referred too often, as the cornerstone of the school of practical philosophy, aligned with his pursuit of a Dwighter, to which he devoted his life. Translated here, the Conversations of 1993, Day 2. This is wonderful, because anyone with love in his heart wants to see everyone in bliss, everyone healthy, and everyone availing freedom. This is the state of a man who considers the world as his family. Such are the wise men. This is the will of the Absolute. Knowledge, bliss, health, and freedom for everyone. His study was a library of knowledge poured into mine and truly anyone's brain who entered. I too now continue to be a ferocious reader, as are his great-grandchildren, who had the opportunity to get to really know him on our last family holiday. And I know, even though he didn't love to show it, that he was proud that they held true and had the ability to argue back over ethics and ambiguity, philosophy and practices. Thank you for showing me how to grab life by both hands. I'd love for a partner through your example with Grandma, which continues to inspire many. He was the example of a true Renaissance man. He had an avid love of music. The record player and or classical FM was always on, filling their home with music, and which continues to be so in my own home to this day. Ava, my daughter, reminds me of how Eddie used to take the position of devil's advocate whenever they indulged in philosophical conversation, much to her disdain. But this was only reminiscent of his persistent love of challenge, to be challenged, and to find challenge. These were all integral parts of his life, and a crucial part to him, which we will all undoubtedly remember. It is what continues to inspire us throughout our years, to never be afraid of challenges, through finding a way to tackle them, because more of the best version of ourselves will be found beyond. Long story short, stand your ground, whatever the argument, and for that message I will forever be grateful. Many of the youth from that time will thank him, and have thanked him, forever, for giving us a very active, full toolkit with which to explore and to communicate with the world, through the desire to challenge and bring out the best in each one of us. For me, maybe attending 11 groups a week was a bit much, but we all agree that he did truly want the best for each person. Love thy neighbour as thyself. Thank you for the long lunches, your appreciation of wine and good conversation, in Venice, Milan, visiting the Last Supper, Sun City, Notting Hill, Queen Anne Mews, The Batch, Joburg, Fulfay, Opera Live for the first and only time, theatre, I bet it would have been podcasts and reams now, as he always wanted to stay relevant. He explored philosophy to the end, with the final chapters being online, seeking the truth and working through his stories each week, documenting as much as he could, knowing the end was nigh. I have no doubt that Grandma Jean has met him at the gates. He and Emerson, His Holiness, Shakespeare, Plato, Aristotle, I can't list them all, but there were many, he could quote them all. I've opened a few bottles of wine, are in deep, fulfilling convivium. May I raise a toast to the man we all knew, in our own way, and who we shall absolutely not forget. My mother said of his passing, a giant of a man has left us today. There was always, for us all, be an Edward size and indeed a Jean size hole in our lives. That he indeed was a giant, and he would have it that we all stand on the shoulders of giants. I was lifted by him and rise, and continue to rise daily to the challenge and privilege of the best life. Great Grandpa, we love you, and because of you, we are here.
A first grandchild. Well, thank you very much, Francis. There's so much that can be said, and you've highlighted most. I'd like to call upon Andrew Braithwaite, who is leader of the KwaZulu-Natal School.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm here on two accounts, as leader of the KZN school, but more so as a friend of Edward's and Jean's, and a friendship that actually developed and grew really in the autumn years of his life. I first heard about Edward when I was at a residential in Johannesburg, and I heard about this man who'd been asked to up sticks from Cape Town, where he is head of the school, involved with Shell, to go to Johannesburg to go and take up the leadership there. And I was really struck by that story. Obviously, the service and the dedication. But what I was really interested in, or what amazed me, was the set of values that you needed to be able to do that. You know, most people would take such a great deal of agonizing over such a decision. He just simply up sticks and went. And it was only much later that I realized that it's actually knowledge that that informs your value set, or that moves your value set. And it was this knowledge that Edward sought throughout his whole life. He dedicated his whole life to to discovering this knowledge and sharing it, giving it out. And I think everybody here today is here because Edward's had an impact on their lives. Over the last 10 years, Megan and my wife have had the grace of more or less annual visits, until Edward and Jean couldn't come anymore, to our farm in KZN. And all I can say is that they were golden weeks. They were absolutely fabulous. And when they left, we would feel, you know, just so absolutely nourished. And of course, they'd always bring a wonderful bottle of wine, and it was always a special one. And we'd spend hours around the kitchen table telling wonderful stories and shrieking with laughter. and then having some real landmark conversations. And on many occasions, my children were there at the same time. And one just is so grateful for them being there and having heard those conversations. You can't concoct that sort of stuff anyway. So it was wonderful. And we would then retire, Edward and I mainly, to the lounge, and we would. I introduced him to Jordan Peterson, and he me to Raphael, and we would have these incredible discussions. And of course, it included an occasional philosophical scuffle as well, which was always good. Their marriage also was just a wonderful example of unity and strength and resilience, compassion. And they were just clearly two companions traveling through the world. And the kids picked up on this as well, and often remarked on the steadiness of their marriage. But of course, this didn't stop Jean from sometimes muttering under her breath and rolling her eyeballs back as Edward launched into a big long story or something that she felt maybe he shouldn't be saying. So it is a wonderful journey. So it is said that compassion is the natural emotion of the wise. And this is compassion which is based in the context of love and understanding of the natural law, or cause and effect. And very close to this, and often misinterpreted, is sentimentality, but this is based in pity and a lack of understanding of the law. And Edward was really not short of compassion, and he really, really wanted you as a person to get rid of your stuff and move forward in a free way. And and he was quite fearful in that way as well. And on this account, you couldn't be overly sensitive to be a friend of Edward's, because your precious affectations would be burned away quite quickly. And really and truly, I think this has been his gift to so many of us here, in that he would just talk the straight talk. There was no nonsense, and he wouldn't accommodate anything silly. He had the courage and insight to point out shortcomings, and he poked fun at the ego. And sometimes this was painful, but it really was all in love. And I can say a true friend and a true teacher. So I feel a deep sense of gratitude for the life of Edward and for Jean, for his sacrifices, service, example, and contribution. And if you mix determination, service, love, forthrightness, courage, and devotion with a dash of fiery Scotsman, you're bound to have an interesting time. Thank you.
There are two things that I pick up from what Andrew has said. Table and conversations. Edward was out of his depth when he didn't know what to do with Ava, with Frances. She loved butter. He often fell asleep on Edward's torso, sometimes on the table. Anyway, Hilary is going to continue, and she's a live wire only daughter of Edward.
Elizabeth Wood.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome, and thank you very much for being here. I want to start off by actually acknowledging Jeffrey and Stephen, who I hope are online. They are in England, they're together, and very sorry that they couldn't be here, because that is family. So when I thought about all of this, I thought, you know, is this a memorial service? Is this, what is it? And then I looked up the word tribute, and I thought it was very apt. Tribute is an act, a statement, or gift that is intended to show gratitude, respect, and admiration. And I think that's, I mean, I think that was my daughter. She was incredible. And thank you for all the people who are speaking, because the different people that speak are really giving a picture of this man who was Edward Thomlinson. No, he wasn't. He was Thomas Edward Thomlinson, and latterly people were calling him Thomas because that's how he wrote his name, Thomas Edward Thomlinson. So I know that when people refer to Eddie, I know that they know they knew him well enough to have called him Eddie. This day is auspicious because in the Christian calendar it's actually Palm Sunday. And Palm Sunday was about Jesus going into Bethlehem, and people threw palms. And I'm not saying that my father was like Jesus. That's not the point. But my father was a leader, and he always used to say, to be a leader, you have to have followers. And you know, there are so many people that followed him, not just in the philosophy school. I've been given notice that in Johannesburg, where he did a lot of cycling, that they are considering doing a 50K memorial ride for him, which I think is awesome. If we were all to stand up and say something, we'd be here for the next year. So a lot of people have said a lot of things about his character. But what I want to do is to draw a picture of who he was as well. So first of all, he was a son. His mother, Helen, was born in Ireland, but she was taken to Scotland when she was a few weeks old. And then his father actually came from Carlisle. So his parents weren't Scottish, but he was. And then he had two brothers, Bart and Brian. Bart had 4 children, Helen, Bart, Eileen, and then Janice. Janice is my real sister. And I'm so grateful that you're here. And Sean, thank you very much for coming from Johannesburg. My father was also a nephew to at least 10 aunts and uncles. And then, of course, he was a husband, and I will come back to that. He was a father. He was my father. He was our father. Jeffrey and Stephen, my brothers, he was their father. And then he was an uncle to a lot of children, because my mother had brothers and sisters and so forth and so on. But then he was also a grandfather, and he has 6 grandchildren. They are Francis and Matthew, Laura and James, and Sean and Heather. He's also a great-grandfather. He's got 5 great-grandchildren. Francis has 4, Ava, Isla, Lucian and Miles. And Matthew has little Peyton. Peyton is 3 years old and a sweetheart. And my father loved watching her and being with her. They came over when she was quite small, but you will see later I've got photographs of him sitting with one or other grandchild at some place. He had to leave home. He was born in Edinburgh. He had to leave school when he was 14 because they needed money. And so his first job was actually with his father delivering milk. He then went on to be a butcher's boy, and a butcher boy had to have a bicycle. Need I say anything more? That's where it started. He then, at some point, joined the Labour Party. And one day, when it was pre-elections and they were folding posters, they were in an L-shaped room. And he was here and he heard this voice. He wasn't sure who it belonged to. And the next day he heard the voice again. And so he decided that when they all had to go home, he'd stand back and try and identify this person. You've guessed that that person is my mother. So they were married in 1959 on the 29th of May, which just happened to be the same day that Mount Everest was climbed. He used to say, know yourself, and everything else you can find on Google. I've got my pages mixed up. Sorry. Can you turn this for me, please? Turn it. No.
Do you want one minute first?
Yes, please. The other one. Sorry. Thanks. It's great. Thank you very much. After they were married, they went to live in London. And at some point, my father did his apprenticeship. And believe it or not, he was a spectacle maker. He used to learn how to grind spectacles. So if you ask my father, you know, what's your trade? What did you do? And he'd say, I was a glass maker. So at school, when we stood in the way of someone, people would say, was your father a glass maker? And I could say, yes, he was. So living in London, they got fed up of the rain, and they decided they were going to leave because they didn't like that weather, which I'm glad they did. So it was a toss-up between Canada and South Africa. And then he applied for a job in Johannesburg, and he got it. So they came out by ship, and they landed in Cape Town, and they took a train, you know, the good old Karoo train, up to Johannesburg. And when they got to Joburg, they said, you know, we haven't got a job for you. So he was in Johannesburg without a job. And they went to have a cup of coffee to you know, decide what to do. And when they were in the shop, there was a couple there who, they had a newspaper. My father wanted to borrow it, and he went over and he said, you know, can I borrow your newspaper? And these people had no idea what he was saying. Because of his Scotch accent, they became lifelong friends. And shortly after that, my father got a job with Shell. he was Shell all his life until Shell and BP split, and Dad went to BP. Now that was his daytime job, his 9-to-5 job, but in the intervening times, he was a mountaineer. So his love for climbing, his best friend Brian Honey, they climbed the Matterhorn, and they climbed Kilimanjaro, and they climbed Mount Kenya, and then we went to Namibia, and they climbed in Namibia. I can remember at some time in my life, we were never at home at the weekends. We were always away camping somewhere. You know, in those days you could lock the house and just go. And we did that a lot, you know. And if we didn't go away, we would walk along the pipe track or the contour path or whatever. And whenever we went away for these weekends, you know, you always have a campfire. Believe it or not, my father played the harmonica, the lead harmonica. He was an excellent, he loved playing, and it was wonderful around the campfire having a bit of music. Believe it or not, he also loved to play golf. However, when he came to Cape Town, he couldn't stand the wind, so he gave up golf. You can't play golf in Cape Town, he says. He and Mum were very good tennis players. And one day, he had the misfortune of a friend asking him to teach him how to play squash. And unfortunately, this man didn't understand the way you hit, and he took a backhand, knocked my father's front teeth out. And that was like 6 days before he was going to climb the Matterhorn. It was all sorted out. And as I said, Mum and Dad used to play a lot of tennis. He actually also played football. And what I remember about him playing football, we would stand there and cheer for him. And then the adults would go into the clubhouse, and the children were given lemonade, and we were allowed to run around and play. And it was magical. It was absolutely wonderful. Swimming. I found his goggles when I was clearing up, and he used to swim at every opportunity, but I mean, he didn't just get into the water. He had to do lengths after lengths after lengths. And when he came to Cape Town, he took up snorkeling, and that was something he really enjoyed. And then, because of the sea, what do you do when you're here? You sail. And that's what he did at Hartway, and he then bought a caravan and placed it at Fulvesay, and we used to go there and, you know, watch him sail, watch him rest. Can I have some water, please? Sorry, I've had some water. Thanks, Richard. Thank you very much. Bring it here. Thank you, sir. Thank you. The other thing he used to do a lot in Johannesburg is he used to run most evenings. And when it was raining, he'd go onto the veranda at the back and skip, you know, just stand there and skip and skip. He had a passionate love of photography, and he was never far away from his camera. And as a child, I can remember often when he would develop his own films and things like that. And also, I remember every time they went on an expedition, whatever it was, we then had to have a slide evening and sit there and watch all these slides, which I've now transferred onto the computer, and so it's there forever. His family followed him to South Africa, and I'm glad they did. Otherwise, I wouldn't know my cousin. He, with his photography, actually, we were watching a film last night, Ford and Ferrari and all the racing, and I remember that Dad used to, part of his job, go to Kyalami when they had 24-hour endurances, and he had some amazing photographs of the cars going by when he sort of left it open for half a minute and so forth. Yeah. His parents came to South Africa eventually, and unfortunately his father, my grandfather, didn't have a pension, so my father had to find something for them to do. And so that's when he bought Pet's Lodge. Pet's Lodge is now where the Noon is, and it was way out of town in those days, and it was a dog kennel and a cattery, and it had 2 houses. So Nana and Papa stayed in the one house, and they looked after all these animals. And he really looked after his parents. I went to England, and I'll come back to that, and then I was there for a few weeks. And then my great-grandmother, Granny Finnegan, decided that she wanted to go and live with her daughter. So Granny Finnegan came to live in South Africa, and then Papa died, and then Nana died, and then she said, I want to go back to Ireland. And she would not be stopped, and she was 94 when she went. So there was no one in Ireland, but her son lived in London. So we were very lucky to have a photograph of Frances with her great-great-grandmother, which is a very rare thing. My aunt my mother's sister came out here, Auntie Margaret, and Auntie Margaret was part of our lives, and I think some of you might have met her years ago. But her husband, Ken, my father used to say, you can write what Uncle Ken hasn't done on the back of a stamp. I think that you could write everything that my father didn't do in his life, possibly in one sentence. Sorry, here we go, yeah. Oh, yeah. Richard, sorry, I need the next page, please. There. Thank you so much, thank you. He had a ferocious appetite for knowledge. And this is how he came to the philosophy school. He saw an advert in Johannesburg, and he went along. And in the second term, he was asked to do tea duty. And he was absolutely insulted. Why would he make tea? And then he thought about it, and he thought, well, I paid my money for the term. I better go and do what they want me to do. When he, I remember a situation in our first house. I could only have been about 5. He was getting very annoyed with the lock to the cellar, and he couldn't open it. And I remember my mother saying, well, stop it. What did they tell you in group last night? I don't know what the answer was, but there you are. was offered a position here in Cape Town, which obviously he took. And it was a great sadness to him that he left the school. And then they agreed to send him the material. And he used to go to Johannesburg, where Mr. McLaren was there. And he kept asking year after year, you know, are you going to send someone to start the school? And eventually Mr. McLaren said, no, you're going to start a school. And he's started the school, and there was a bit of trepidation because they didn't know if people would come. And the first night came, and I think there were over 70 people. It was a huge success. I asked the first question, and my father just glared at me as if to say, how dare you do that, you know, shut up, whatever, he didn't know. And he kind of brushed it off, I don't remember, and I can remember saying to him, why didn't you answer my question? And he said, I didn't know how to, I didn't know the answer. So that was great. And then the school bought a house in Harmon Road, and that was where people met for a little while. I was in a position where my education had to be catered for. And because of my handwriting, I needed a typewriter. And the only alternative was to go to a boarding school in Kimberley. My father didn't want that. So instead, he sent me to London, and I ended up living at Waterbury and being homeschooled with 3 other girls. And I can remember feeling as if my parents didn't know what to do with me. However, with Grace, the night before I left, we had people round and we were listening to music. And I looked at my parents and I looked at my father, and the knowledge arose that he was doing the best he could for me. And I think as parents, we honestly do the best we can for our children. And so with that knowledge, I was able to go to London and do the best I can for him. After Harmon Road, they bought a house in Bowood Road, which has been mentioned. And yes, I can attest to what Mr. Lambie said, because I didn't make the grade. I never did the August. I couldn't cycle. I can't cycle a bike, so I didn't get into the top echelons of school because I didn't do the August. However, the day I informed my mother that I was going to do the New York Marathon, he phoned me and he said, don't you dare. I'm going, Dad, what do you mean don't I dare do the marathon? He said, it's too much. I said, excuse me, what have you just done this weekend? You've done a 400, and he had to shush because I was right, yeah. So, we've heard that he went up to Johannesburg to the school there. Christopher and I, we got married and came back to live in South Africa. And it was, as Francis had alluded to, she and Matthew were given the opportunity to sit at his knee and learn such a lot. And I think a lot of what you saw about Francis is she had a special relationship with my father, and it really, you know, made her what she is today. When my parents got married and they came to South Africa and they started the school, my father could not have done it without my mother. It really was an thing that he needed her. And in the latter years, he used to say, "We two are one." And that was certainly true. Sorry about this. I'm getting to the last page. Yeah. Thank you, Richard. I'm on the last page. Yeah. You know, in the latter days of Dad's life, he had given up watching TV or working on his computer. And I understood this. I understood that Dad was just being. He was not sad, he was not glad, he was not emotional. He was just being himself. And it was quite difficult in the end to see this huge man being human. And one day, crucially, I think you remember, I think it was you, I'm not sure, Dad said, "I can't get out of bed." And I looked at him and I looked at you and said, "Do you know, when I was a child, every time I said I can't, I was told there was no such word. Get out of bed, Dad. Don't tell me you can't do it." And, in the end, I was his daughter, obviously, but I had to take charge of him. And to watch him go down the way he did was, it was what it was. But I really want to give incredible thanks to Christopher, because you looked after him in such a way that his spirit was uplifted. And I really am most grateful to you, Christopher, my love, for doing. And then I would like to thank Rebecca, Monica, and Ukushli. Monica is my housekeeper. And let me tell you, my father loved you dearly. Every day is Monica coming. And then in the morning she'd go, "Who's coming tonight? Who's coming tonight?" Because in the last 4 months, I needed help at night. And it was too much for Christopher and I. So Ukushli was one. Rebecca came for a little while, but Rebecca's been down in our lives for over, 30 years or something like that. So the other nurse, the caregiver, couldn't make it here, and Mimi was with us when he passed. But I want to say to you, Ukushli, the way you looked after my father on that second last night was incredible, and I really love you for what you did. So in closing, I just want to say there's so much that could be said, but what a man, what an absolute incredible being he is. Thank you.
I think that's okay. Right. I just want to return you to this. You will probably see there is a four-eyed person. And being equal, needing hearing aids, we just wished that the subtitles were a bit slower and people would speak in subtitles. One of the sort of endearing memories of my father-in-law, he would come down with his walker after being told to get out of bed. That would only be like 3 minutes afterwards, you know. Where are my glasses? They were usually up here. If not there, they were in his walker with his hearing aids. Anyway. There is so much that can be shared, and there are just a few things that have been missed out. I don't think enough emphasis has been made on the fact that he was a cyclist. And for me, he's probably spent more hours cycling than I've had hot meals. And I will always be 20 years younger than him. We've mentioned hobby catting. My wife often went with her father to check out the ladies of BP and Shell garages. He was, he didn't think he was qualified for this job here in Cape Town. And he needed a lot of prompting from Mr. McLaren to do that. But as we say in South Africa, he was not only great, he was a rainbow person. There were many colours to him, and there are not enough of you to share the other prompts that got him to do what he has shared with you all that come here on a regular basis. He was a leader of Toastmasters in Johannesburg. He was invited to be the leader of Toastmasters in Cape Town. Basically, he was a pretty good speaker. And at our wedding, he spoke first before I spoke, and it was probably the longest conversations that we shared at our wedding. And we had to rush it because he was leaving for a plane to come back to Cape Town. But I had asked to be married at least a year before then. But he trained staff. He did his 25 years worth of service with Shell and BP, which enabled him to get a full pension, a fantastic medical aid which he used for the next 50 years. But that training of staff was exactly the same as he has given as a leader of a philosophy school. He expected the best of everyone. And he said, you do have to acknowledge, the risks, or you need to take risks to be the person that you were meant to be, an awesome, fulfilling person. So as a motivational speaker, this was actually quite easy thing to do, but it was challenging with the people who questioned, wanted better understanding, not only of themselves, but of the people they walked with. So as a Rainbow Man, he had many links and probably have influenced more people outside school than inside school. Our relationship in school is a particular one, which many of you can remember. His daughter and he are both Geminis. My daughter Francis and Jean are both Virgos. I'm a laissez-faire Cancerian. It's like oil and water in many situations. But if we jump to the end, it was an honour to live with a man with his vast knowledge. He was a pain in the butt for the librarians. As soon as he could get a library ticket, he was offered a book, a kid's book. That's not what I'm here for. So the next day he went back and said, I want one of those books up there. I said, well, that's for adults. And by the way, you can't change your book for 3 days. But he responded, and if you look at his library, if you look at his CDs, his DVDs, his vinyls, you just think, wow. There are hours that could be his companionship in his quiet moments. But he also had his quiet moments on a bike. It's a challenge for yourself to ride a bike beyond normal distances. And if we take this, he was awarded that for his cycle ride from Paris to Brest and back again. It has to be done in 90 hours, and he did it twice. Was 91 hours for the third time. That was a challenge. The challenge equally was to have me around for the last 6 years, the last 6 months, the last 6 weeks, and the last 6 hours. I was a challenge to him because I wouldn't let him be a doubting Thomas. The attitude that relates to the doubt was to be sure, hopefully with proofs written in ink, that what was being done was the right thing for an elderly gentleman, and he did never like being called old. So, with thanks to the frail care helpers in the front here, those last 6 weeks were special. And his loss of voice, his profound thinking, his love, even though challenged by me frequently to sort of wake him up and say, forget about this philosophy mumbo jumbo, You don't need the proof. As your daughter said, you must be busy. Please be busy being. So I end here by saying thank you for everybody who's come, people who are online, which will be on for a while, and to introduce Matthew, his first son-in-law, granddaughter, a grandson.
Good morning. On behalf of my mother and father who are there with you today, and my uncles Geoffrey and Stephen, who were unable to be there in person, and along Good morning. On behalf of my mother and father who are there with you today, and my uncles Geoffrey and Stephen, who were unable to be there in person, and along with the rest of our family, we thank you all for coming for today and for helping us in organising of today's celebrations. In particular, our family would like to give special thanks to Renee and Richard Oates in helping my mother with the preparations of the event, Mr. Van Zyl and the Cape Town Philosophy School for allowing us to use Talana Road Schoolhouse for today's event. And to Charmaine Kendall for your help in choosing the rose bushes that will be planted in the garden. To Kurbis for facilitating the live streaming of today's event. And to Shaham for arranging the beautiful flowers you have with you today. And to the various leaders of the philosophy schools around South Africa who've been able to make it down to Cape Town and to be a part of the event, along with anybody else who has travelled from afar. For the very special people who have given care to my grandfather over the last few years and months of his life, we give thanks to Mimi and Akushley and Rebecca, without whom my parents would not have managed the night care. We also know your presence gave him a lot to look forward to every day. To Monica and Christopher, my granddad also loved your presence, and your help in the house and garden really made him happy. From the bottom of my heart, I would like to thank my father, who has been a steady rock of support to my mother during this time, and along with all the love and care you gave my granddad over the last 2.5 years. To my mother, there's a lot I can say, but thank you for organising today's event and for the unwavering support and love you showed Granddad over the last few years and months of his life. To all those who joined us online, we thank you too. And to anyone else we may have left out, our thanks go out to you as well.
May I introduce Albert, the current leader of the Cape Town School.
Good morning. I first want to thank all the friends that we haven't seen in a long time who are back here this morning. So I'm thinking of the Zadras, of June Sterling, Trish Legg, the Fremantles, and many others. So really good to see all of you. If you don't know me, I'm a Johnny-come-lately, having only joined the school 30 years ago. So in school terms, you'll know that's recent. So the result of that was that I never really got to know Mr. Thomlinson while he was leader of the Cape Town School. But I thought, I've heard about this fierce person, right? In this lion of Africa that Mr. Lambie speaks of. But I thought, how bad can it be? I mean, I'd done 10 cycle tours, right? Share a birthday with him. My son's name is Thomas. I thought, okay, I'm in the sort of well placed here. Anyway, so fast forward probably 15 years. On a Thursday morning, my wife Annette walks into the kitchen and says, "It's so interesting. The first law of Manu is patience and confidence." And I thought, okay, sounds okay. And so we had a weekend at the school a couple of days later. And on the Saturday morning, Dr. Kendall asked us to go into small groups. And he asked me to facilitate a small group that sat just about where Renee and Mark are, just at the door there. And I shuddered in fear and panic when I realized that Mr. Thomlinson would also be in this group. This was the moment of truth. And so he walks into the room, and I hadn't started yet. We were still standing, and he says to me, "What's the first law of Manu?" And very calmly, because of Annette, I could say, well, it's patience and confidence. So I survived that one. Thanks to Annette. So, a year and a half or so ago, I took the baton from Dr. Kendall, and before that, Mr. Thomlinson, as the leader of the school. And there was a very strong sense of responsibility and of respect and love for the work that the two of them had done for Dr. Kendall and Mr. Thomlinson had done for 50 years before. And we had a week here with Mr. Lambie, and I wanted Mr. Thomlinson to know this. And so I got my chance one afternoon. We were sitting outside waiting for Hillary to fetch him. And I plucked up my courage and I said to him, Mr. Thomlinson, I want you to know that we will look after the school for you. And I really want to say the same thing to Hillary and Christopher and the rest of the family, that we are aware of and we recognize and we're grateful for what he built, and we will look after it. Really, and we'll remember your father and cultivate his memory in that way. Okay, thank you.
That's not the end of the formalities. The more exciting thing is the rose bushes. So if you can walk outside, we'll have Mukesh who replaced Mr. Thomlinson saying a few words. So the last and the next bit, followed by some eats, will follow.
Sorry, can I just mention that the dedication of the rose bushes is calling for you to have a charged glass. So walk down the path and you can put something into your glass, and then Mukesh will speak when everyone's more or less ready.
No New Year's Day to celebrate, no chocolate covered candy hearts to give away, no first of spring, no song to sing. In fact, here's just another no April rain, no flowers bloom, no wedding Saturday within the month of June. But what it is something true, made up of these three words that I must say to you. I just go to say I love you. I just go to say how much I care. I just go to say I love you, and I mean it from the bottom of my heart. No summer's high, no warm July, no harvest moon to light one tender August night, no autumn breeze, no falling leaves, not even time for birds to fly to southern skies, no Libra sun, no Halloween, no giving thanks to all the Christmas joy you bring. But what it is, so oh, so new, to fill your heart like no three words could ever do. I just no New Year's Day to celebrate, no chocolate covered candy hearts to give away, no first of spring, no song to sing. In fact, here's just another ordinary day. No April rain, no flowers bloom, no wedding Saturday within the month of June. But what it is something true, made up of these three words that I must say to you. I just called to say I love you. I just called to say how much I care. I just called to say I love you, and I mean it from the bottom of my heart. No summer's high, no warm July, no harvest moon to light one tender August night, no autumn breeze, no falling leaves, not even time for birds to fly to southern sky, no Libra sun, no Halloween.
You don't need me to do back.
No giving thanks to all the Christmas joy you bring. But what it is, the awesome to fill your heart like no three words could ever do. I just called to say I love you. I just called to say how much I care. I do.
So I'm very grateful for this microphone because I can get your attention that way, which otherwise might have been hard. In there, I was supposed to introduce Mukesh Bawan, who is the leader of the school in Gauteng. I didn't do that then, so let me do that now. Mukesh, very, very nice to have you and Andrew here, and please.
Thank you, Albert. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Hilary, thank you very much indeed for giving me the honor to pay a tribute on behalf of the School of Practical Philosophy in Gauteng. Thank you very much indeed. I also feel a great trust has been put to me this morning because of all the speakers. I'm the one trusted to speak with a glass of champagne in my hands, but which I'll respectfully put down now for a few moments. Mr. Thomlinson was a man of great insight with principles that you wouldn't find in textbooks. And to begin on a light-hearted note, the one thing that he said very often was, behind every successful man, there was a very, very surprised mother-in-law. However, in the case of Mr. Thomlinson, with this great person, every step alongside with him, every step of the way, through his cycling adventures and misadventures, through his pursuit of the truth, was his wife, Mrs. Jean Thomlinson. And I just want to acknowledge Mrs. Jean Thomlinson as well. In addition, she was the epitome of devotion to her husband. She was with him every step of the way. In addition, when both Mrs. Thomlinson and Mr. Thomlinson came towards the latter part of their lives, Hilary Thomlinson, the very fine example, perfect example of a loving daughter that served her parents all the way through to the end. She's eloquently acknowledged the efforts of her husband, Christopher. But along the way, Hilary also faced many challenges. Not too long ago, Christopher suffered a setback, and Hilary transcended all of this with such perseverance and fortitude that Hilary is a very fine example of perseverance and fortitude itself. Thank you, Hilary. Mr. Thomlinson moved to Johannesburg to serve as a school leader when the then school leader, Mr. Bergstrom, passed away rather unexpectedly. I was so struck that a man could make such a sacrifice to move from Cape Town to Johannesburg. I was really very inspired by him, but it took some time before I could meet with him in person. And it was when we moved into the preparatory group and he began tutoring us that I got a sense of just what he stood for. And if I were to summarize it, his depth of wisdom, the breadth of his compassion and love, and his unflinching adherence to discipline. These three attributes of him, of the many, has shaped and touched the lives of just about everybody in the School of Practical Philosophy in Gauteng. When he began to tutor the preparatory group, and of which I then became a part, I became very attached to him. And I would spend a lot of weekends and weekday evenings too meeting with him and just lapping up his wisdom and his love and his compassion. And what I told him at one stage was, my father passed away when I was relatively young, and he left me with the words, always put the truth first. And I was too young at the time. I knew the words were important, but I didn't know the meaning. And it was with the time that I spent with Mr. Thomlinson that he gave expression to the meaning of the words, to put the truth first. Over the time, Mr. Thomlinson not only just demonstrated what I've just articulated as the depth of his wisdom, his adherence to discipline, and the breadth of his compassion, but his vision and his ability to make that vision manifest, it's almost prophetic. So much like the vision to purchase Talana Road, I recall sitting with him on the bench at St. Mary's, looking across this majestic building across the road, which is called Salisbury House, and he said the school should get use of that building. And after a long, hard battle, the school has today the use of that building. Not only that, at that time, just before he became school leader, there was the vision to get a day school going, St. James, based on sound spiritual principles and, of course, with academic excellence. It was a vision that many people had applied themselves to, but Mr. Thomlinson had what it took to make that vision galvanize the hearts of the people and the resources and make it a reality. The contribution that St. James School has had on society, that those merits cannot be quantified in any way. But if you were to meet any graduate from St. James and ask them where would they like their child to be, without fail they would say St. James. In addition, just his compassion and what he saw the needs of the community, he took the youth from the underprivileged community in which the school is located, and he raised them to near professional cycling status. Now that's not a surprise, isn't it? But not only that, just the work that he had done for the community and upraising the level of consciousness through what we call the JPU initiative. That was the sort of the man that Mr. Thomlinson was. But what I'd like to focus on are two subtle aspects which perhaps may not be that obvious, intuitively obvious, but I'd like to speak about that just to expose those principles of Mr. Thomlinson. And both of them, I must say, was preceded, you won't believe this, both these principles were preceded by bringing tears to Mr. Thomlinson's eyes. And Hilary, I was responsible for those tears on both occasions. On the one occasion, it was a happy occasion, and the other was a very unhappy occasion. To begin with the happy occasion, when Mr. Lemby asked me to serve as leader of the school in Gauteng, and then he asked me to go and meet Mr. Thomlinson, I went to Mr. Thomlinson and I met him in his office, and as is the tradition in my culture, I bowed down to him, I touched his feet, and I asked him for his blessings to take on the leadership of the school. And he shed a tear, gave me a hug, and he said, "Be your own person." And in saying be your own person, he articulated a principle that he had shared with me many, many times. And this is the one principle that I'd like to expose. He said, never ever compromise the truth for the good. Now, such a statement, if you think about it, never ever compromise the truth for the good. You could have somebody that's good-natured, but not putting the truth first. A statement like this, that's so applicable in this day and age, you won't find in any textbook or anywhere else. And it's principles like these that has been the foundation for the School of Practical Philosophy in Gauteng. The other one took place a few years later. As I took on the leadership of the school, there were differences. And we had many, many debates on these differences. And during one debate on these differences, a tragic event took place. The man that I respected as father and leader of the school, in the heat of the debate, I called him by his first name. Immediately, Mr. Thomlinson was sat back and tears flowed from his eyes. I realized the debate had got the better part of me and I had committed a major transgression. Such was the realization of the transgression that I could not get to apologize to him at all. I knew I had to apologize, but I just didn't have the strength. Days went, weeks went, months went, years went by. I knew I had to make the apology. And it was in my study of the detailed translation of the Mahabharata that I woke up to the fact that I need to apologize now. In the Mahabharata, we have the Bhagavad Gita. As many of you know, is the dialogue between Arjuna and Krishna that took place on the eve of a 18-day battle. In the first few days of the battle, the Pandavas suffered severe losses. And the king of the Pandavas, which was Arjuna's elder brother Yudhishthira, on the evening of one of the battles, he said something to Arjuna, his younger brother, who was the general of the Pandavas. He said something to him which Arjuna took as an insult. And Arjuna immediately took out his sword from its sheath and charged at his brother to behead him. Krishna intervened and said, "What are you doing?" Arjuna said, "I took an oath that if anybody were to insult me and my bow and arrow, I would behead them." Krishna said, "You can't behead your eldest brother, he is also the king." Arjuna said, "There was never a time when I've never fulfilled a vow. I took a vow that I would behead anybody that insults me." Krishna said, "There is a way that you could behead your eldest brother, the king. It would be far more cruel than beheading him with the sword. The cruelest form to behead anybody that's eldest to you in rank and position is to call them by their first names." Arjuna did so, and in a way beheaded Yudhishthira. This brought horripilations to my body as I read this. I called Mr. Thomlinson the next morning. Many years had passed by now, and I brought up the incident, and I said, Mr. Thomlinson, I beg of you, if you would kindly forgive this major transgression on my side. And this is where you see the magnanimity of Mr. Thomlinson. His response was so magnanimous that there wasn't even any hint of myself having committed a transgression. His response was so magnanimous that although I had injured him, not only did he not injure me, but he left me potentially to be a far bigger person than what I could ever dream to be. What he said to me when I recall the incident, he said, by whatever name anybody calls me, I only hear the name Param Atman. People can call me whatever they like, I only hear the name Param Atman. And I revisited the incident, and Mr. Thomlinson wouldn't budge. He says, I only hear the name Paramatman. He did not even concede that, yes, you did something wrong and I forgive you. That would be leaving me injured. He brushed that aside. All I heard was the name Paramatman. Such was his magnanimity, that his magnanimity in the spirit of truth embraced forgiveness, embraced compassion, and embraced love. These two tributes I wanted to expose this morning, never ever compromise the truth for the good and the magnanimity of spirit that Mr. Thomlinson lived by. So, to bring this to conclusion, I quote the verse from the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 3, verse 21, in which it is said, whatever a great person does, that the generality of people follow. Whatever actions he sets as a standard, that is the very standard that the rest of the world adopts. And that's the tribute to Mr. Thomlinson on which I'd like to end with, together with where I started, that along with this great man, at his side was Mrs. Thomlinson, and supporting them right to the last breath, Hilary Lane. Thank you very much. Now we come to the part of dedicating these rose trees, symbolic of Mr. and Mrs. Thomlinson. The dedication of these rose bushes, and I would say, given the stature of both of them, I would like to use the word the consecration of these rose bushes to Mr. and Mrs. Thomlinson. We will consecrate these by hearing a very ancient invocation. Some of you may know the invocation and you could follow it with me, and those that do not, the central word in that invocation is Purna, which means perfect, complete, full, pure. So I will sound that invocation. I will sound it in Sanskrita and then in English, and through that process, we will consecrate these two rose bushes to Mr. and Mrs. Thomlinson. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnam Udachyate Purnasya Purnam Adhaya Purnam Eva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shantihi. That is perfect. This is perfect. Perfect comes from perfect. Take perfect from perfect, and the remainder is perfect. May peace and peace be everywhere. Thank you. Now we come to the part to raise our glasses and to consecrate these rose truces with the concluding ceremony of raising the glasses to Mr. and Mrs. Thomlinson.
I'll paraphrase, that concludes it. Tell them to go and get food. So, please.
Thank you.